In May 2025, we escaped Asturias for a much needed road trip to Portugal. The first months of the year had passed too quickly, and we realized we didn't have any vacation since our trip to Mexico last December. We desperately needed a break, mentally, physically, everything. You know the feeling. Northern Portugal is a great choice for a trip because you have many beautiful cities to visit, like Braganza, Porto, and Coimbra. And going by car allowed us to see other parts of Spain that were surprising, like the desolate mountains and valleys before Leon. So we planned our trip, 4 days and 1,200 kilometers, booked the Airbnbs, packed our bags, and got ready. We left early on Tuesday around 1:30 p.m. It's early for us because we typically sleep until 1 or 2 p.m. because my wife works with a Mexican company and we leave on Central Standard Time, that is 8 hours later than Spanish time. Our first destination was Braganza, a small Portuguese city close to the Spanish border. Driving there took 4 hours and I wasn't prepared for the landscapes. The barren, sparsely populated Cantabrian mountain range reminded me of Finnish Lapland in summer. The vegetation was blooming everywhere with yellow flowers, but it was also obvious that this remote area of Spain had a much colder climate than the moderate coastal weather in Asturias. We only saw a couple of villages along the way. It made me think back in time that these mountains provided a natural barrier against the invading Moors and allowed the Kingdom of Asturias to grow in strength in relative peace and start the Reconquista over 1,000 years ago to give birth to the modern Spain as a country. After the long stretches of mountain roads and quiet, isolated villages, the landscape turned into a vast rolling fields. We were getting close to Leon. Another thing that surprised me in Leon was the red soil. There had to be a lot of iron mixed with the sand, as countless red patches were visible along the road. We didn't have time to visit Leon this time, so we drove past it to get to Portugal sooner. Not only had the landscape changed, but we also noticed a change in the building style. In this area, grey stone houses were more common as we drove through some small villages. And if the driving was fast until now, the last leg before Braganza turned out to be much slower. The small border road was following the sides of high hills and was filled with steep curves, slowing the speed to 40 kilometers per hour. The scenery was stunning, but we were both getting tired of sitting in the car and just wanted to get to our first destination. Finally, we reached the border. In the typical European Union fashion, there is no border control whatsoever, just a sign that you're entering to another country. And fair enough, Spanish and Portuguese people are cousins, and without the road sign, we wouldn't have known when the country had changed. The architecture and small villages looked the same. However, by looking at the road signs and storefronts, it became apparent that they speak another language here. However, as a language nerd, I knew that some locals speak the Mirandese language. There's a mix of Astur-Leonese Spanish and Portuguese with a long history. The nature is breathtaking in this region, with lush green forests with brooks and rivers running across the landscape. I was secretly hoping this side of the road would be faster to Braganza, but it took a good while before we got to stretch our legs. At first sight, Braganza opened in front of our eyes as a beautiful modern little city with a population of 35,000. We found a local cafeteria and did our best to speak Portuguese instead of Spanish. Here was my first chance in 5 years to have the Portuguese delicacy, pastel de nata, that is one of my favorite desserts. The new city seemed vibrant and full of life. One notable difference to Asturias was the diversity we saw on the streets. Portugal's colonial past means even a small and remote city like Braganza is surprisingly multicultural. However, the new part of the town didn't tell the whole story. Before starting off to Porto, we decided to drive around the old town. Despite the relatively small size, Braganza has played a big part in history. Most notably, the House of Braganza was founded by the first Duke of Braganza, Afonso, who was an illegitimate son of King John I of Portugal. This royal family came into power in the 17th century and ruled independent Portugal and the Portuguese Empire for centuries and intermarried with many European monarchs, such as the King of England and the King of Spain. You can really feel the long history when you enter the historic center. Celts, Romans, Goths, and Moors lived and ruled here way over 2 millennia. Now the traditional Portuguese white houses bring you back in time, inviting you to visit the medieval castle of Braganza. The impressive walls and the keep are well preserved and host a beautiful little town inside. I can only imagine the centuries before how this castle has been the hotspot in wars and invasions, even defending successfully against the troops of Napoleon. You can walk on the walls and get a beautiful view across the rolling hills with many olive orchards. We didn't have too much time to spend in Braganza, and it was time to go. However, I did a mistake driving my car in the historic center. A tourist bus got stuck in a narrow corner at the plaza, and we had to wait almost 30 minutes to get out. The drive to Porto was thankfully faster, as most of the way we got to drive on a highway. If you ever happen to drive here, prepare for toll roads. There's gates on the highways where you first pick up the ticket, and then on the other end you can pay with your card. For the whole trip, I think we paid something like 40 euros for the tolls. We were already late to check into our Airbnb and wanted to get to Porto before it got dark, so I drove as fast as I dared. And finally, around 9:30 p.m., we got there. Spain and Portugal have a different time zone, so we also traveled in time and gained 1 hour. Now, Porto is the second largest city in Portugal, and there is some confusion about the name that I want to address. The official name is Porto, and in Portuguese, they often use the definite article O before names like O Porto, just like the in English and el in Spanish. And that's why the city is also known as Oporto. Okay, now you might be interested if Porto has anything to do with the name of the country, Portugal. Yes, you had the right hunch. Porto is an ancient Roman port and was originally called Portuscale. The latter part of the name was likely a pre-Roman Celtic toponym for the area. Over the centuries, the name turned into Portucale and finally into Portugal, giving name to the country that split off the Kingdom of Leon, that was the successor for the Kingdom of Asturias. Okay, we all love history, but let's get back to today. Modern Porto has over 1 million inhabitants in its metropolitan area, and it is crossed by the river Douro, creating a postcard-perfect landscape with bridges, beautiful architecture, green nature, and multiple highlights. That's the reason Porto welcomes millions of tourists yearly. This wasn't my first time in Porto. I visited it several times back in late 2017 when I had just begun my digital nomad lifestyle. This time it was filled with tourists, but also going through major renovations around the historic center. So how was our visit like? We found a very nice and spacious Airbnb in the Bonfim area, just east of the center and close to the Campo 24 de Agosto metro station. The area is full of niche restaurants and unique shops and has this alternative vibe that still retains its authentic old Porto charm. It was late in the evening, and one of the first things my wife wondered about was safety. And it's worth mentioning, Portugal and Porto in particular is generally very safe. You can walk late outside without worrying about your safety. People are polite and don't bother you. I lived in Portugal for a couple of years before and never had any trouble. Next day, we went exploring the city. For a late breakfast, we visited the local restaurant, O Macrobiotico. That was a vegan restaurant with delicious food. Portugal has an active scene for vegan and vegetarian restaurants. After a meal, we took the metro down to the center. One stop, actually. We did have a car, but honestly, driving through the historic centers of European cities, it's usually a nightmare. Narrow streets, no parking, and tons of traffic. Walking or hopping on public transport is almost always the better call. In Bolyao, we visited the market, which is unlike the Mexican mercados that my wife is used to. This market is very modern and tidy. Next, we walked down to São Bento, which was under renovation, and then up and down the winding streets on the west side of the center. On those narrow streets, you could get a glimpse into old and traditional stores for various things, like wooden brooms, full of sentimental patina of past decades. We went to the Mirages bar, a hidden bar with a great view over the river, as I started to feel thirsty for some Portuguese beer. The view was fantastic, but unfortunately the vibe wasn't. The waitress was oddly rude, and we decided to skip the drinks and find friendlier service elsewhere. Going down the stairs, we arrived at the riverside and walked along to see the bustling cafes, bars, and restaurants full of hungry and thirsty tourists. From there, we walked back up to Jardim de Cordoaria and stopped to rest our legs and munch down some sandwiches with beer. In Portugal, you have two brands of beer, Sagres and Superboc. Both are good. One popular place to see in that area is the Livraria Lello. This Art Nouveau bookstore has been named the most beautiful in the world, with its fantasy theme. And it's also capitalizing on the fact that J.K. Rowling was teaching English in Porto in the 90s, even if the author denies being influenced by the bookstore. Place is so popular that you can always see a line in front of the store and you have to pay €10 just to get in. We skipped it for now as we are not big Harry Potter fans. For the evening, we got some snacks and stayed at our Airbnb to watch some episodes of The Last of Us. Next day, it was time to head out to Coimbra, that was 1 hour and 20 minutes away from Porto. However, I wanted to make the last stop on the other side of the river. This outside is called Villanova de Gaia. We visited the picturesque park Jardim do Morro and the monastery Serra do Pilar. The brisk wind made the weather cool, but just warm enough to enjoy some burgers for breakfast and prepare us for the next drive. At this point, I had realized I did a small mistake. I had planned going to Coimbra, and I thought I had booked an Airbnb in the same city, but due to the last minute rush, I actually booked a place in a small town, Montemoro Velho, that is 30 minutes away from Coimbra. To cover my mistake, I offered to visit Figueira de Foz on the coast, which is called the Queen of Beaches in Portugal, thanks to the long sandy beach and promenade with cafes and restaurants. We got there and the weather was windy and cool, parking was a pain, and we didn't have a clear plan, so we turned the car around and got into Coimbra about 1 hour later. This happened to be a rush hour, and the local authorities in Coimbra were doing a lot of maintenance work for the roads, so getting through the traffic was challenging. However, we finally found our way to the botanical gardens of Coimbra and had a chance to relax in the shade of the plants and trees from all over the world. So what is special about Coimbra? Coimbra has one of the oldest and most prestigious universities in Europe and the world. It was founded in 1219 and actually first in Lisbon, but they moved it to Coimbra because the locals didn't like the students or something like that. Anyhow, the massive campus on the hilltop holds many impressive buildings and has influenced the intellectual, cultural, and political history of Portugal for centuries. Today, over 20,000 university students give this ancient city a young atmosphere with numerous events, bars, and cafes. Again, another coincidental connection to Harry Potter. The university students in Coimbra and in Portugal wore black capes, much like the students of Hogwarts. But instead of practicing magic, the male students sing on the streets, playing traditional instruments. This is called Fado de Coimbra, and tell stories about the longing for love, saudade, and the city. Coimbra also acted as the Portuguese capital before Lisbon for over a century, helping the kings to lead the Reconquista to drive out the Moors from Iberia. And beyond rich history, Coimbra is architecturally a very beautiful city, with a picture-perfect sites around the river and hillsides. After the botanical park, we walked along the river, crossed the pedestrian bridge, and wandered around the old commercial center before stopping to eat some delicious chicken at a Korean restaurant. And there were actually 3 Korean restaurants lumped together, and I remembered seeing one next to our Airbnb in Porto as well. Sitting there, I couldn't help but wonder, why are there so many Korean restaurants around here? Then it hit me, maybe they're run by Brazilians of Korean descent who moved to Portugal. Korean culture is booming, so it would make sense to ride that wave. Yes, that's what I'm typically thinking when I sit down to eat. This is just my theory. If you have an insight on the topic, please drop a comment. We fell in love with Coimbra. It is charming and idyllic. We found some souvenirs like coffee mugs to take with us, and my wife bought me a t-shirt. One interesting point about traveling in Portugal is the ability to use English to communicate with others. While in Spain people don't typically speak English or shy away from using it, Portugal is a different story. Actually, the worst thing you can do as an English-speaking foreigner is to use Spanish phrases in Portugal. So don't say gracias, but obrigado, and so on. Back to the point, most people, especially younger generations, speak English quite well, which makes it easier when I ran out of words with my limited Portuguese. So why do Portuguese people speak English? I think there are 3 main reasons. Much like Nordic countries, Portuguese people hear English much more in movies and series, as they don't dub their content to the same extent as in Spain. And perhaps the cultural attitude towards English and studying English is more positive. This is just my guess. Thirdly, Portugal has a long historical ties with England, which might have an influence in the modern use of the Anglo-Saxon language. England and Portugal formed an alliance with the Treaty of 1373, the oldest diplomatic agreement still in force today. One reason was the common enemy. Both countries were often at odds with the Spanish crown. I think this is fascinating, but we need to continue the story. For our dinner, we climbed up to the University Hill and found a vegan restaurant, O Burrito. It was an authentic, alternative experience with many Mexican influences in the decor that my wife appreciated. The food and service were excellent and the ambient was pleasant. However, some student was randomly playing the gaita outside, the Iberian bagpipe, but we didn't let that stop us enjoying the night. After that, we drove back to our Airbnb, Montemoro Velho, that translates to the big old hill. We stayed in a tiny cabin, just big enough for a bed, small kitchen, and a shower. It wasn't as fancy as the one we had in Porto, but for my taste, this suited us perfectly. We heard some noises around the cabin over the night, but I grew up in the middle of a forest, so that didn't bother me. Next morning was time to say goodbye to Portugal this time and start driving back north. On the way back, we stopped in Oporrinho in Galicia to have a lunch with a local friend. Getting out of the town was a problem as the police had closed some of the roads and it took us almost an hour to get back to the highway. And here's an advice I'd like to give. Don't have anything scheduled on the returning date. We both had a meeting to attend and I was driving at the speed limit for hours to get back to Asturias in time. Another thing to keep in mind is to keep an eye for gas stations near the road. Some of the longer stretches in the middle of nowhere had no gas stations nearby for tens of kilometers, and we would have had trouble if we ran out of gas. Finally, we arrived back home after the midnight, and I was spent after focused driving in the dark for hours. Now, a little over a week after we got back, I can say this. Portugal is absolutely worth visiting. Next time, though, I'd probably skip the long drive and just take a plane. Maybe we'll explore Lisbon soon. And while Portugal has its own unique charm, for now I'm happy to be back in Asturias. After nearly 2 years here, it's really started to feel like home. If you enjoyed this travel story and want to hear more about life abroad, subscribe to the channel. That way I know to make more videos like this. And if you're ready to keep exploring, check out of these videos next. Thanks for joining me for the trip and see you on the next one.